Bodgies and Widgies, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're in front of a 4-foot aquarium, which generally means it's going to be a video about either my goldfish, but in this instance, my native Australian lungfish. It's been a bit of a while since we did the last update, and a few things have changed as always with the aquarium, so I wanted to bring you up to speed with what's actually changed and how my Australian lungfish is doing. But before we get into that video, as always, let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm filming on, the land that you're watching this video on, and the really amazing people who manage our land at the moment, like our councils, our park rangers, everyone amazing like that. So huge thank you to them, and a massive thank you to you for watching this video. But I say, without further ado, let's have a look at my Australian lungfish. Okay, so basically I've got a few different clips of my little lungfish doing his thing, and I wanted to sort of explain some of the behaviours that he's been displaying quite a fair bit. I think it's sort of at a point where I've kept him for long enough where I know what his usual behaviours are, and that way I can sort of explain them to you and see what he does for most of his day. And to start off, this is basically it. He'll just stay in one spot for hours and hours and hours on end without moving. I think probably about 60 to 70% of his day is just lounging around in a single place, but it makes sense because lungfish aren't really an active predatorial fish. They just sit around, wait for things to come to them, and that way they eat a little bit and they don't really need that much energy to move, so they just sit there and grow. That's basically it. But in a way, this behavior of him just lying around in one place is really cool as well, because I can see his gills pulsating, I can see his body, that there are no sort of injuries or scratches on there, and it just allows me to make sure that I can actually have a proper look at him and that he's okay. With a lot of these animals that you really want to take a lot of care of, most of the time they're always active and moving around, so you can't really get a good glimpse at them. But the other thing is, because he does just stay in one place all the time, if I want to try and record him, some other fish in the tank will be curious and just come up to the camera and then just block all sights. But it's really cool to see this little guy actually thriving in his environment, and that's exactly what you want to see with a fish like this. But when my lungfish does decide to move, it's this weird, like, half-drunk way of swimming. You can see it here, and also when he surprisingly does go up to the top of the surface or swims around in the mid-column of the water. But most of the time, he's just sliding around, and I think this is possibly a form of camouflaging into his environment, where if he slides around and just goes with the flow of the water, it potentially may seem like he's just a log or something which is inedible, perhaps. But also, when he does decide to move, it's not a lot of movement most of the time. He'll just move a centimeter and he's like, yes, exercise for the day is done. And finally, probably my most favorite aspect of him is when he is actively searching for food or moving around in his environment. He does this behavior which I've sort of called arching, which is difficult to see now because these gigantic bolsterous goldfish just get in the way whenever I want to record him at any time. But I'm actually feeding him at the moment, and you can sort of see some of the pellets being flushed around by the goldfish, but you'll notice this arching behavior where his head is pointed towards the ground. He uses his two pectoral fins, which in a lungfish are sort of like hands because they're not ray fins, sort of like the goldfish. They're actually lobed fins, which in itself is actually really rare. There are only a handful of fish species around the world that have these lobed fins, but you'll see it now where he does this arching behavior and he sort of uses his pectoral fins, pushes himself up from the ground, and then uses his head to sniff around the sand and move things around. His feeding response as well isn't really that sort of aggressive, or it isn't really that responsive to food. He'll firstly smell the water column, know that there's something edible in the water, then he'll start swimming around and searching for it, sniff it, taste it a little bit, know that it's food, and then he'll start eating. But most of the time, by then, the goldfish will come down to where his food is and start messing around with it. But here, this is a clear depiction of that arching behavior that I was talking to you about. But again, yeah, this is where his feeding response comes in, where he's like, wait a minute, there's something in the water that I can eat. Where is it? then he'll be like, do I really want to go and get it? Do I really want to spend the energy? And then he almost walks using his fins, which is the most coolest thing to see. And you'll see it here where he will use his pectoral fins, his side fins, which play such a huge aspect in his life, and he will use those to just paddle along the floor, notice that there's food, and then he'll start eating. When I feed this guy, I actually have to feed the aquarium at two ends, where the goldfish get their food at one end of the tank, and then the lungfish gets his at the other end of the tank. But yeah, by the time he reaches the food, the goldfish are always all over there, and then they'll start eating his food as well, which is why I feed this aquarium multiple times a day. But for the most part, I actually feed a mix of foods, one of which is generally larger than the mouths of the goldfish, because these goldfish have just like O-shaped mouths, whereas the lungfish actually has a pretty big smile. He can fit some decent sized foods down his mouth, and he actually breaks it up, which allows him to digest it better, and that works out really good.
Alrighty, Bodgies and Widgies, I really hope you enjoyed this video about my native Australian lungfish. If you've got any further questions or you want to see something more specific or in detail about this little guy, aside from just a regular update, then make sure you let me know in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this to come, consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a big thumbs up. We're almost at another big milestone in the channel, and I could love if we could just continue in that direction and hit that. But a huge thank you for watching once again, and as always, stay happy, stay safe, stay Aussie Australian, Bodgie and a lungfish